government fails, the world's off its rails, leaders are whacked, democracy is under attack. It's time to get smart, folks, time to get real. Let's cut through the crap, tell us how you feel. Let's cue the talent, let's meet the host. Podcast by George.
Hello, hi, how are you? And welcome on in to another podcast by George. Got a serious story today, one I'm a little remiss in getting to. I wish I'd have covered this story a little bit earlier. I tried to get Andrea Zahuri on the line to talk about her arrest, but she's been a little bit busy with that. It's big news, not only here locally in the state of Iowa, but around the country, hell, maybe around the world. Got a guest today that can really speak to that, and it's Randy Evans with the Iowa Freedom of Information Council. He's the executive director, and that's a nonprofit education and advocacy organization that works on issues pertaining to open government and government accountability. Randy took over the role in October 2015 after a 40-year career with the Des Moines Register. He joined the Register in 1974. During his time there, he served in a variety of editing roles, including state editor, city editor, news editor, and assistant managing editor, supervising at one time or another every department in the newsroom except for sports. After retiring from the Register in December 2014, Randy began writing a weekly column on government and politics for the Bloomfield Democrat. Now, that's his hometown newspaper. He started his career there at the age of 16 when he was hired to handle janitorial duties and write occasional sports and feature stories. That's a big deal, actually. I'm going to mention that here in a minute. He's the recipient of the Iowa Newspaper Association's Distinguished Service Award, the Iowa Center for Public Affairs Journalism's Free Press Champion Award, and the Iowa FOI Council's inaugural Friend of the First Amendment Award. Now, for 20 years, Randy served on the Board of Trustees of Student Publications Incorporated, the nonprofit corporation that owns and publishes the Daily Iowan, the student-run newspaper at the University of Iowa. Okay, so that's the long-form bio, and regular viewers of my podcast know I always do that the first time somebody comes on the show. But let's welcome him on in. Randy, welcome to a podcast by George.
Thank you, George. Glad to be with you.
You know, that working class background that you have, I wanted to mention that right off the top because that's very significant. It's important. A journalist that I know you're aware of, Matt Taibbi, one of the country's leading independent journalists, was on my show not too long ago. And one thing that he always cites and points out, one of the things that's really changed in mainstream journalism and corporate news is that there used to be a lot of men and women with backgrounds like yours that came up through the ranks, came up out of very poor beginnings, kind of blue collar. And I tell people to think of, our listeners would be familiar with Donald Call to a certain extent, Mike Royko, Jimmy Breslin, those types of people that were on every major newspaper in America. That's all kind of gone away. It's kind of passing with the generations. Can you kind of start off and tell us how you think that's affected newspapering, in particular, folks like yourself moving into retirement?
Well, I think that the danger is that as journalists get much more comfortable in life, it's easy to forget those readers, those viewers, those listeners who are having a tougher go of it. And I think journalism through the years has tried to, as they say, afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted, because it's easy for business interests, big corporate interests, to make their voices heard. There are no lobbyists lined up outside of the Iowa Capitol or the U.S. Capitol, clamoring to represent Joe Lunchbucket. And I think that's the role of the journalist, is to make those voices heard.
That's exactly right. There's I tell people I like to refer to myself as a member of, or under the influence of, Big Peace or Big Green, big Medicare for all. There's not a lot of lobbyist support, not a lot of corporate backing for those endeavors. Well, okay, let's turn. I want to talk about this working journalist. It's been all over the national news, and I know it's first and foremost in your mind, and it's Andrea Zahuri. Now, am I pronouncing her last name right, Randy?
Yes.
Okay, Sahuri. Okay. Now, here's the background on that for our listeners that may not know. She was arrested on May 31st. Now, this is right from Randy's website. It was the third straight day of protests in Des Moines following George Floyd's death. Journalists cover protests to serve as the eyes and ears of the public to ensure free speech and assembly rights are upheld and to seek out the truth of what unfolds, whether a protest is peaceful or violent, and whether law enforcement's response is viewed as proportional or excessive. I mean, that's a great summation. Did you write that, Randy, or is that somebody with your organization?
Oh, it's these magic fingers.
Ah, that's great. I mean, that's a great summary. Okay, so to continue on here, each day the demonstrations in Des Moines started peacefully, but devolved through the night into bottle throwing at police, window breaking, and other vandalism. Police responded with dispersal orders, tear gas, pepper spray, and arrests. Okay, well, I'm all right with that. I mean, if you're throwing bottles and vandalizing, and okay, I can see that. It's a response. Now, Sahuri, and here's where I get interested. She's the public safety reporter for the Register. She'd covered the protests all 3 days. From about 3:30 to 4:30 p.m. on May 31st, she covered a peaceful march near Evelyn Davis Park, north of downtown, and then was assigned to cover a growing gathering near Merle Hay Mall, about 5 miles away in northwest Des Moines. Her former boyfriend, fearing for her safety, accompanied her. Now, we're going to get to this. I mean, she got arrested and it went to trial and all that type of thing. But I wanted to stop here, Randy, and have you comment on this, because back in my day, now that's what I was. I was a police and fire reporter. You might have called me the public safety reporter. Well, I didn't run around with lanyards and credentials and that type of thing. Broadcast media has the advantage of usually having a camera or a recorder, although today that's oftentimes no more than a cell phone. Print reporters, and you know this all too well, I mean, really all you have a lot of times is a notepad. But still, she was the public safety reporter for the Des Moines Register. What, the police didn't know her, didn't know of her? She'd been covering these things for 3 days, and they weren't aware of who she was. Plus, she had identified herself at the site, I think. I don't know. I didn't see a lot of coverage on this particular angle. What was your take on that?
Well, I'm sympathetic for the police officers who are thrust into the role of trying to maintain peace or to restore peace under these chaotic situations that protests often devolve into. But where I draw the line is, and so it's not surprising that in the confusion of the moment that a journalist might be swept up along with demonstrators. But as they start sorting out who's who, that's where my blood pressure starts to rise, because the police commanders, the Polk County Attorney's Office knew within minutes that she was a working journalist. There were other journalists there who acknowledged who she was. Her editors spoke with the police officials. There at a certain point, and it was not a year later, at a certain point, they knew that she was a journalist. She was there on the job. And so I have no patience for the decision to go to trial with these charges against her.
Well, and you're an old reporter, as we mentioned. I've read a lot of accounts of this. I even watched some of the trial on television. I really like the way that you put this down. I want to continue with this, what you've written. The crowd, which started with about a dozen protesters at mid-afternoon, swelled to well over 100 by 6:30 p.m. Now, everything in context, in Des Moines, that's huge. I mean, if that was downtown Chicago, that probably wouldn't be anything. But
they were waiting for the bus.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Sahuri started tweeting photos and observations as protesters blocked traffic on Merle Hay Road and Douglas Avenue. Now, just before 8 p.m., police deployed tear gas and drove vandals and other protesters away from the mall and across Douglas Avenue, the Register reported. Sahuri moved with those protesters and was across the street from the mall when she was pepper sprayed in the face and arrested. Okay, so here's what I want to get into. So, and this goes back to where you started talking about how journalists' jobs, they're supposed to be there and observe and report these things back to us. I mean, that's what they do. They've got to be there. Well, she moved across the street. My take on this would be the police should be arresting people that they had seen, that they had eyewitnessed vandalizing, destroying property, throwing bottles, those things that you talked about earlier. Obviously, she had not done those types of things. She's a reporter with a notepad. How do they just group arrest people that include her?
I think one of the fundamental questions that arose during the trial, and it's evident from the outcome of many of the other arrests during these protests, was whether people actually heard an order to disperse, because the situation was so chaotic that having a squad car drive through this intersection, with an officer inside over the loudspeaker saying, to disperse, it's not apparent that it was being heard by everyone. And the reality was that Polk County ended up dropping dozens and dozens of charges.
Yes.
It's regrettable that that it took this long. And I mean, if Joe Ordinary Citizen, under the same circumstances as Andrea Sahuri, were arrested, they never would have been able to fight it all the way through trial. I mean, the Register spent, I would estimate, probably close to $200,000 defending this reporter. Joe Lunchbucket is going to go in and say, give me some sort of a plea deal. I'll plead to something, whether they broke the law or not. So it's just unfortunate that there wasn't better judgment being displayed by the Polk County Attorney's Office, to use the taxpayers' resources to go after a reporter who was, in the line of duty, doing her job, telling people in Iowa about what was going on in these protests.
Well, it was bizarre and outrageous, as you mentioned. The Register, of course, has to do this. I mean, they've got to protect First Amendment rights and their reporters' ability to do these types of stories. They were kind of in a no-win situation. And then Andrea herself, I mean, she had to go to trial. She's not going to plead to something that she was 100% right on and was eventually vindicated. And that's something that people don't, I don't know, that just kind of slipped away, was the fact that all this money, time, and effort on the part of the county had been wasted, as you mentioned. And I don't know, they never expressed any regret. They never admitted that they were wrong, that I know of. I just thought it was shocking all the way around. I mean, I've just really never seen anything like it. And to give a little more personal context to this, the police department has this liaison officer, and it's changed through the years since you and I were doing police reporting, obviously. But that's what this person does. They jump in front of the cameras every time they're out there. They usually don't say anything except the very obvious. But I mean, that's their job, Randy. This had been going on for 3 days, the George Floyd protests. We were all well aware of it. This particular thing out at the mall was the biggest in Des Moines, maybe overall, but certainly at that time. Where was that liaison officer? Again, didn't that officer know who she was? Why wouldn't they be there to say, wait a minute, that's a Register reporter, leave him alone?
Well, and the public information officer has commented since the trial concluded that he was well familiar with Andrea, and basically suggesting that she should have been close to him so that he could show her where she could go. But what that overlooks is that, there are two sides to this protest. There is the side of the protesters, and there is the side of law enforcement, what they're experiencing. And you can't adequately cover events of this magnitude if you're only covering one side of it. You're not going to hear what it is that people are concerned about, why it is that they're out there in the parking lot of a shopping center protesting the George Floyd death. You're not going to hear the reasons that they're there if you are half a block away with the police commanders. So it's, yes, it would have been better if she had a lanyard around her neck with a great big media credentials on it, but that's when the officer with the pepper spray came around the corner of the building and spotted her and just a short distance away and gave her a face full of pepper spray. He had no time to be examining her credentials. The Des Moines Police Department doesn't issue credentials. I and my organization reached out to the police department's public affairs officer and offered to bear the expense of acquiring bright fluorescent vests or whatever with media stenciled across the front and the back that he could then pass out to journalists so that the officers had a more recognizable way of knowing who was a journalist and who wasn't. I'm still waiting for a response to my letter to them. I'm just disappointed.
Well, I guess my take on it would be if you're trying to determine who's a journalist and not, you might start at who's throwing rocks and bottles and that type of thing and who isn't. I mean, that would be a good criterion. I got to tell you, Randy, back in my day, I mean, this credentialing thing is becoming an issue. The credentials I had, I got this little press badge. That's all I ever had. A lot of times the stations issued them themselves. I mean, there wasn't any official credentialing back then. Maybe we need it now because of, like I said, the cell phone reporting that's going on. Maybe it's tougher to tell who's who in these scenarios. But again, if you're a police reporter, God, it seems like they would know who you are. But the First Amendment really makes us all journalists as far as that's concerned. I mean, there's no decoder ring that you get. I mean, I got a degree in journalism, but I mean, you're really not certified or credentialed. I mean, you get a state house credential, I think. You get passes and that type of thing. But I don't know. The vest idea is a good one. But you can always forget the lanyard or forget the vest, leave it in the car, whatever that might be. That means you don't get pepper sprayed in the face and thrown in the back of a paddy wagon, bounce down to the station. And before we lose you here today, the final point that I want to get to, and you got to this a little bit, is the fact that the county continued to pursue this. It went through with all this trial expense and this duress to the reporter. Are you concerned about the long-term implications of that, the chilling effect that this has on reporting?
Absolutely, because the fact that the Polk County attorney has shown no regret over the decision to press forward is very troubling, which signals to me that we're going to see this again the next time there is a protest. There has to be a way for law enforcement and the media to coexist at the scene of these kinds of major news events. And as I said from the very top, I understand the confusion that occurred. I'm not critical of the decision to detain Andrea. I am critical of the decision to keep her in custody for several hours after she was taken into custody, and then for Andrea to go through this whole pretrial process, and her employer, I mean, spending, and again, I say $200,000 at least. It is breathtaking. And, that's the taxpayers of Polk County. It's their money that was expended in the trial. The newspaper had to absorb the cost of the defense, but there were multiple assistant county attorneys who were involved in all of the pretrial motions and hearings and all of that, and it's just a significant waste of money, I believe, and there was no evidence at all that Andrea was throwing bottles, throwing rocks. There was no evidence that she was doing anything other than interviewing people, making photos and posting them during the protest.
Yeah.
And journalists have been doing that since we wore, triangular hats.
Yeah. And not to be overlooked either, because that was born out of trial. I mean, the county got its ass handed to it, basically. I mean, they were wrong right down the line on every single point. She won easily, but what the register had to go through, what she had to go through, is not to be understated. Well, I got to let you go. We're out of time here, and I could go. Randy and I could talk forever because of our backgrounds here. One thing I wanted to get to just very quickly, because I bring this up on the podcast all the time, and I don't have a lot of people that are willing to weigh in with an opinion from the journalistic community, and it has to do with Julian Assange, Randy. Now, the Iowa Freedom of Information Council obviously is concerned with all things Iowa. Are you part of a larger group? And what's the take on Assange sitting out there in the Old Bailey in London?
Well, I think the issue of people who have access to secret documents, this goes back way back in history. I mean, you and I could talk about the Pentagon Papers.
Yeah.
I think we have to be very cautious about using the power of arrest, the power of criminal charges to go after people who are blowing the whistle, if you will.
Espionage charges.
What
My
our
God.
government is up to.
Yeah.
Because, throughout history, there have been lots of things that have come to light because of somebody with access to inside information, sharing it with journalists who share it with the public. I'm uneasy about stamping the label of traitor on somebody, too easily. Nobody wants the nuclear codes made public.
Right.
No, but the United States government fought all the way to the Supreme Court in the Pentagon Papers case that disclosing this history of the Vietnam War was somehow going to jeopardize national security. And as we have seen since then, it didn't really happen.
The same thing is true with Julian Assange. That's the ultimate irony of this type of thing. He's accused of compromising national security and endangering lives for this incident with the Apache helicopter in downtown Baghdad in 2007, I think it was. Well, it's come to pass that nothing like that has ever happened. I mean, it's proven that he didn't do that he didn't endanger or put anybody at risk. No one died because of that. He's just exposing this film and some other things through WikiLeaks that he had. And the other irony is that the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, these major newspapers, these megalists in the journalism community, republished the information that he put out there. And they've never been taken to task for what they've published. And furthermore, they haven't come to a real strong defense of him. Not like I would like to see, not like you just did, as a matter of fact. But that's a topic for another day. Randy, we got up front. I'm way over time here. I mean, this has been great. I want to thank you for coming on a podcast by George.
My pleasure. Thanks a lot.
Folks, that's Randy Evans of Des Moines. He's the executive director of the Iowa Freedom of Information Council. I hope you enjoyed this particular episode. I know I did. And I encourage you to subscribe to us on YouTube if you can, and ring that notification bell so that you see us there. Also on Facebook, like us so that you can watch videos like this. You can go to podcastbygeorge.com and pick the platform that you like. But that's going to do it for now. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is. And there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.